look really slow and difficult right now, and that things are going to really, really speed up as the consequences of what we're doing materialize. In that regard, it seems like a good strategy is an electoral strategy, and in that regard, that rather than setting up third parties or offshoots, that we establish progressive caucuses within the Democratic Party and gradually take it over. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think there's certainly a role for electoral politics, and it certainly had some impressive success recently for DSA. I think the center of our work should be on movement building and talking directly to people who are affected, but there's certainly a role for electoralism. I don't consider myself, I'm not a political strategist, that's not my thing. I'm an economist, so, but it does seem to me that movement building would be the highest priority for me. But electoral, fine. People should run for office, I'm all for a million AOCs.
June?
Hi. You suggested that the government should buy out, nationalize the industries which are changing the climate, would be to buy them out. And you suggested that we would have them pay for themselves to be bought out by taxing them. Could you give us more detail on how that would actually work?
Yeah.
Mike.
Yeah, actually, in my paper, June, I did the math for that, and I ran it by an economist friend. It happens that we could buy out all the oil companies, all the coal companies, all the majors. I mean, there's some little ones, but buy out all the oil companies, all the coal companies, and the natural gas companies. We could buy out all the airlines, all the major industrial consumers of fossil fuels. The airlines, the chemical companies, the worst polluters, the chemical companies, the major industrial consumers of fossil fuels, auto industries, all the auto companies. We could buy these all out, the oil producers and the major industrial consumers of fossil fuels, for about $2.25 trillion. Sounds like a lot. But Donald Trump just gave away a tax break to the rich of $2.3 trillion. So if we simply rescinded that tax break alone, that would pay for the entire buyout of the fossil fuel industrial complex.
What if they don't want to sell?
Well, that's what governments are for. We make them a deal they can't resist. And one of the reasons they can't resist this is because they know perfectly well that fossil fuels, they can't produce all that. That's why they're producing so much right now as they can, because they know that a lot of this is stranded assets and they're not going to be able to produce it in another couple decades or so. So in some ways, and by the way, that calculation is based on their retail value without any discounts for the harm they've done. So with appropriate discounts, it would cost a lot less, I should think. But anyway, we just have to force a buyout. We have to say, look, you people, we're not proposing to hang you from the lamppost, even though we think that's what we should do. We're proposing to buy you out and at your fair market value. And another thing about fair market value is don't forget that it's not just capitalists who own shares, but 25% of fossil fuel, 27% of fossil fuel shares are held by pension funds. That's to say, workers. We're not interested in expropriating workers. So we need to buy them out, because that's the easiest way to avoid a long class war that we can't win, and we can pay for it by taxing the very people who own these industries. That is the capitalist class as a whole. But I mean, in that case, rescinding that tax cut would pay for that. There are many other ways we could pay it. We could pay for it by raising income taxes and so forth on the rich. I'm sorry?
Happen, because by my lights, they're fixing to mine the asteroid belt and move to Mars. So they don't want our money. They want to have access to the resources and the labor for as long as it takes to leverage the people that matter to them, which is a very few people, into a livable situation, whatever that may be, dome cities on Earth or dome cities on Mars, and they don't care about the rest of us, and what is to stop them from doing that?
That mobilization we're talking about.
Next question. Well, while people are, I'll call you in a second. I'd like to point out, Richard said, well, we won't talk about the harm you've done. But, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Richard mentioned, well, take the deal, we won't talk about the harm you've done. I mean, that's something to think about. Cigarettes, the attorneys generals of like 30 states sued the cigarette companies and got something like $260 billion in a settlement. So that's something to keep in mind.
They're still selling them.
I'll call on you next. Yes.
I'm so glad I came here from Norwalk, and I really appreciate what you had to say. I wanted to let you know that for many years I've been an activist. I think that AOC is interesting, and I'm thrilled, and I think there should be more AOCs. And women and men, but especially women, should run. But let's go back to the local. We have some municipal local elections coming up. And I've been trying to cultivate some new potential candidates that do their homework and are willing to discuss and listen to folks like you and others about what's really going on and getting the facts on the table instead of the myths. Bridgeport, I know, and Norwalk has been doing their plan of conservation and development, which the state of Connecticut demands of each town every 10 years. Going to the budget meetings of some of these towns, I try to encourage people to take a look at those budgets to see if they're starting to get a greener economy, and if not, demand that. And so I wanted to know, are there model ordinances and almost forcing local governments at times? One of my ideas was, if the plans of conservation and development do not have an action plan that greened up the economy, the state should not give that town any of our state money. Right now, they have the ability to keep people out of certain grants if they don't update their plans, but there's nothing to help lead them to punish for not even caring. And quite frankly, I'm not getting any younger, I'll wrap up. It's just taking too long. The moon and stars rarely align in our towns where you have the right mayor or first select person and the right council people. And it's just too hard to get that lining up well, especially when you have a mess in Washington. So any thoughts on municipal and state forcing our local towns to green up their economies in ways that count sooner rather than later? I'd be very interested.
I just can't think of anything offhand. I think you're much more in touch with municipal and kind of local level politics than I am. But I think it's just kind of generally speaking, I think that the best way forward for people who want a Green New Deal is to make it possible for people to develop visions and strategies to make it possible for people to see how transitioning to a green economy is not punitive. It's not going to cost them their job. It's not going to cost them their future. In fact, it can make it much better for them. So that's why we have to have ways to. That's what's brilliant about the Green New Deal proposal for guaranteed jobs, because that is a kind of bottom line. I mean, I'm arguing in the case of oil workers and so forth that we should give them a job at their same pay and benefits doing something else, because we need them on our side. And some people will say, well, oil workers make a lot of money compared to other people who are working minimum wage. Don't they deserve a better job too? Yes, they do. But in the meantime, I'm prepared to pay the oil workers off at their current wage to get them on our side. Because if we don't solve this climate crisis thing in the next 10, 20 years, we're not going to have a future to worry about. So I think it's really, really urgent to think of strategies, of both local, national, regional strategies that can guarantee people employment and a future a solid economic future. And that means buying out businesses too, because I mean, they're polluting local businesses, and they're going to be, they can't survive if you ban whatever it is they're making. So we say, okay, so we'll give you something else. I mean, I think we need to nationalize a lot of the economy, but not everything, all the way down to the mom and pop supermarket, stores and restaurants and whatnot.
We're gonna have to stop.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get back into this a little later on. Alex, another round of applause for Richard Smith. Thank you so much. And Alex.